trading station Velura Prime drifted silently in deep space. It floated between two dead stars. Cold, dark, forgotten. The station was ancient, older than most civilizations that now traveled the galaxy. No one remembered who built it first. But over time, it became something important. A place for trade. A place where thousands of species came every day. Merchants sold strange fruits from distant worlds. Engineers traded rare machine parts. Travelers rested before continuing their long journeys across the stars. Most days were predictable. Ships arrived. Cargo unloaded. Credits exchanged. Arguments about prices. Then everyone left again. Safe. Routine. Boring. At least, that was what everyone believed. Elias Vance looked exactly like the kind of man who would never cause trouble. He was 34 years old. Medium height. Broad shoulders. Rough hands from years of work in ship kitchens. Right now he walked through the station's central market carrying a simple cargo bag over his shoulder. Inside the bag were glass jars. Spices. That was the only reason he had come to Velura Prime. Elias worked as a cook aboard a cargo ship called the Drifting Mule. The ship traveled long trade routes, sometimes spending months in deep space. And when you cooked for a crew stuck in space for that long, spices mattered. Good food kept people sane. Elias stopped at a stall filled with bright alien fruits. One of them was dark purple and shaped like a twisted star. He picked it up and smelled it. His face lit up. Interesting, he murmured. The vendor behind the stall was a pelon. A small creature covered in soft silver fur. Its large black eyes blinked curiously at the human. You like? The pelon asked in broken trade language. Elias smiled. I have no idea what it is, he said calmly. But I want to cook with it. The pelon made a strange chittering laugh and wrapped the fruit carefully. A moment later the vendor also pushed a small jar across the counter. Special paste, the pelon said proudly. Elias opened the lid. The smell hit him instantly. Burning rubber mixed with something sour. Most beings nearby instantly stepped back. Elias stared at the jar. Then he grinned. I'll take that too. No one paid much attention to him. Humans were still new to the galactic community. First contact had happened only 8 years ago. 8 years was nothing in galactic history. Most older species had already made up their minds about humans. Their conclusions were unimpressive. Humans had no claws, no venom, no natural armor, no acidic spit, no psychic abilities, no natural weapons at all. They were friendly enough, social, curious, and oddly obsessed with cooking food. The official evaluation in several galactic archives described humans as moderately durable omnivores with cooperative social behavior. In simpler terms, harmless. Tavs watched the human from across the market. She was a Sithari, an insect-like species known for their intelligence and careful research. To anyone else she looked like another customer studying merchandise. But in reality she was observing. For the past 6 months, Tavs had been assigned a simple task by the Sithari Council. Study humans. Record behavior. Evaluate their long-term threat potential. So far the results had been boring. Her reports always said the same thing. Humans were adaptable, social, surprisingly durable. But dangerous? No. Her latest report summary read, threat level, minimal. Tavs adjusted the focus of the optical scanner embedded in one of her compound eyes. The scanner locked onto Elias. He was laughing with the pelon vendor now, holding the strange purple fruit like he had just discovered treasure. Tavs felt a faint sense of pity. Such a simple species. Happy with such small things. Then the station shook. The sound came first. A deep explosion that rolled through the metal structure like distant thunder. The entire market vibrated. Lights flickered. Several stalls collapsed. Then the alarms began. A sharp mechanical siren filled the air. People froze. Every head turned upward. A cold mechanical voice echoed through the station. Warning. Structural breach detected. Concourse 7. All civilians proceed to emergency shelters. For a moment nobody moved. Then the doors at the far end of the market exploded inward. Metal twisted. Smoke flooded the corridor. And through that smoke, something stepped inside. They were enormous. Tall reptilian warriors covered in dark green scales and heavy natural armor. Each one carried a long plasma pike glowing with violent blue energy. The Gorvan. A species feared across half the galaxy. Conquerors. Raiders. Warriors born for battle. They moved fast. Organized. Precise. Within seconds they sealed every exit. Civilians began screaming. The Gorvan soldiers pushed forward, herding the crowd toward the center of the market hall. And then their leader walked in. He was even larger than the others. Nearly 3 meters tall. Scars covered his armored scales like old battle maps. His name was Krothox. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding stone. "This station now belongs to me." Silence fell instantly. Hundreds of terrified civilians stared at him. Krothox slowly looked across the crowd. "You are now hostages. If the Galactic Council wishes to see you alive, they will pay." He paused. Then his yellow eyes narrowed. "If they refuse, one of you dies every hour." The market hall went completely silent. Fear spread through the crowd like cold water. People began trembling. Some collapsed to their knees. Tavs felt both of her hearts beating faster. This was bad. Very bad. She began counting the soldiers. 1, 2, 3. 12 visible guards. More likely outside. Fully armed. Fully armored. Station security had already been defeated. No rescue was coming anytime soon. Tav slowly turned her head and saw the human again. Elias Vance sat quietly on the floor near a support column. His bag rested beside him. His hands rested calmly on his knees. He was not shaking. He was not panicking. He was simply watching the Gorvan soldiers move around the hall. Tavs activated her medical scanner. Heart rate, 62 beats per minute. Breathing slow. Even. Muscles relaxed. In a room filled with hundreds of terrified beings, the human cook looked like a man waiting for a bus. Tav stared at him. And for the first time since she began studying humans, she felt a strange sense of uncertainty. The first hour passed slowly. Fear filled the air inside the trading hall. Hundreds of civilians sat packed together on the cold metal floor. Different species huddled side by side. Some whispered prayers. Some cried quietly. Others simply stared at the ground in silence. The Gorvan soldiers watched them like predators watching trapped animals. 4 guards stood near the main entrance. 2 guarded each side exit. The rest walked slowly through the hall, checking the crowd. Their plasma pikes hummed softly with deadly energy. Krothox sat on a large cargo crate near the main door. He looked completely relaxed. In one massive hand he held a metal bowl filled with raw red meat. He ate slowly while watching the hostages. Like a king observing his prisoners. Tavs tried to control her breathing. She had never been this close to real danger before. Sidhari researchers did not fight wars. They studied them. They recorded history. They analyzed the behavior of other species. But today she was not a researcher observing from a safe distance. Today she was one of the hostages. Her thin legs trembled slightly as she shifted position among the crowd. 2 Dreth merchants sat beside her. Across from them, a Pelin family clung to each other. The 2 small children hid their faces in their mother's fur. The smell inside the hall had already begun to change. Fear had a scent. Every species produced it differently. The Pelin gave off a sharp sour smell. The Dreth smelled faintly metallic. Even Tavs knew her own species produced a bitter chemical scent when frightened. The mixture hung heavy in the air. But one creature in the room did not smell afraid. Tavs turned her head slowly. The human. Elias Vance still sat against the support column. His cargo bag rested beside him exactly where he had placed it earlier. He had not spoken much during the last hour. He had simply watched. His eyes moved quietly around the room. Guard positions. Door controls. Patrol patterns. Tavs noticed something strange. The human was not just watching randomly. He was studying. She activated the scanner in her eye again. Heart rate, 63 beats per minute. Still calm. Still steady. That was impossible. Tavs had studied dozens of species under extreme stress. Even trained soldiers showed increased heart rates during hostage situations. But this human cook looked like he was sitting in a quiet cafe. She could not understand it. The second hour passed. Then the third. The Gorvan soldiers rotated positions. Some guarded the hostages while others rested near the walls. Krothox did not move from his crate. Occasionally he spoke short commands to his warriors. They obeyed instantly. The system was organized. Efficient. Brutal. Tavs knew what that meant. These were experienced raiders. During the 4th hour, a Gorvan guard walked through the human section of the hostages. There were 5 humans total. Elias. A strong woman with muscular arms. She had introduced herself earlier as Priya, a cargo loader from a nearby freighter. Next to her sat a middle-aged man named Aeon Quo, a ship medic. He was quietly treating a wounded Dreth merchant whose arm had been injured during the attack. Near them sat a teenage boy called Ro. He looked terrified but tried to stay calm. The last human was an older woman named Chin. She had spoken very little since the takeover. Her eyes remained closed most of the time. The Gorvan guard stopped in front of Elias. He kicked the human's cargo bag. "Art. What is inside?" the guard growled. Several nearby hostages flinched. Elias slowly looked up. His voice remained calm. "Spices," he said. "I am a cook." The guard stared at him for a moment. Then he barked a harsh laugh. "Soft creature," he muttered. He kicked the bag again and walked away. Tavs had been watching carefully, and she noticed something the guard had missed. When Elias looked up at the Gorvan, he had not looked at the soldier's face. He had looked at his neck, specifically at a small space between the thick chest armor and the shoulder plates. A narrow gap, where the scales were thinner. Tavs felt something cold move through her stomach. She did not know why, but something about that look felt wrong. Very wrong. More hours passed. The air inside the hall grew hotter. Breathing became difficult with so many beings packed together. Some hostages began losing hope. A group of Dreth merchants whispered quietly about the ransom. "Maybe the Galactic Council will pay," one said. "Maybe not," another replied. "If they refuse." The sentence was left unfinished. Everyone knew what it meant. Krothox had been very clear. One death every hour. Tavs slowly shifted closer to the human group. She told herself it was for observation. Her research on humans required more detailed data. But deep inside she knew the real reason. The human cook was the only being in the room who did not seem afraid. And somehow that made her feel safer. The 6th hour arrived. Krothox stood up from his crate. The room fell silent instantly. He stretched his massive arms and cracked the thick bones in his neck. Then he looked out over the hostages. "No message," he growled. "No payment." His yellow eyes scanned the crowd. "Very well." He pointed toward the center of the hall. "Bring me one." 2 Gorvan soldiers stepped forward. They grabbed an elderly Pelin from the crowd. The creature was small, fragile. His fur had turned white with age. He weighed almost nothing. The soldiers dragged him toward Krothox. The Pelin children began screaming. Their high cries echoed painfully through the hall. Tavs felt both her hearts pounding. This was it. The first execution. She looked toward the human again. Elias Vance was watching. But something about his face had changed. The warmth was gone. The friendly smile that had existed earlier in the market had disappeared. His expression had become still, cold, focused. Tavs had studied human emotions for months. She recognized this one. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was the expression of someone who had finished calculating and reached a decision. Elias slowly turned his head toward the other humans. His voice dropped to a whisper. "He is going to kill that old man." Priya clenched her fists. Rose swallowed nervously. Anquo looked at the injured civilians around them. Elias continued quietly. "Help is not coming in time." Silence followed. Then he spoke again. "I think we need a plan." Tavs felt a sudden chill. Because the way he said it sounded very calm. Too calm. Like a man discussing dinner preparations. Not a hostage surrounded by armed soldiers. She stared at the human cook. And for the first time, Tavs began to suspect something terrifying. Maybe the galaxy had misunderstood humans. The old Pelin trembled in the grip of the Gorvan soldiers. His thin legs kicked weakly in the air as they dragged him across the floor. Krothox watched him with cold amusement. The warlord slowly raised one massive claw and addressed the crowd. "The Galactic Council believes I am bluffing," he said. His deep voice echoed through the hall. "They think I will wait." He leaned down toward the terrified elder. "They are wrong." The Pelin children screamed louder. Many hostages turned their faces away. Some covered their eyes. Tavs felt frozen in place. She had studied wars. She had read reports about executions and massacres. But reading data and watching it happen were very different things. Her 2 hearts hammered inside her chest. Behind her, a quiet whisper broke the silence. "How many?" Tavs turned quickly. Elias had moved closer without her noticing. He sat beside her now, his back still against the wall. His voice was barely audible. "How many guards in this room?" Tavs blinked in surprise. For a moment she almost forgot to answer. 12, she whispered. She pointed slightly with one antenna. 4 at the main entrance. 2 near each side exit. 2 walking patrol. Elias nodded slowly, like a man mentally counting ingredients. "What about the doors?" he asked. "Magnetically sealed," Tavs replied. "Control panels on the walls beside them." Elias followed her gaze. His eyes briefly studied the panels. Then he spoke again. Their armor. Tavs hesitated. Very strong, she said. Natural plates reinforced with minerals. Gorvan warriors are extremely durable. Elias gave a small thoughtful nod. But not everywhere, he said quietly. Tavs frowned. What do you mean? Elias turned his head slightly. His eyes focused on one of the nearby guards. Armor needs joints, he said softly. Where there are joints, there are gaps. Tavs felt a strange unease spreading through her body. You are a cook, she reminded him. Elias smiled. But it was a different smile than before. Smaller. Colder. Where I come from, he said quietly, a cook is just a soldier who learned what to do with a knife. Then he reached for his cargo bag. Tavs watched curiously. The bag still looked ordinary. Just a travel bag filled with cooking supplies. Elias opened it slowly. Inside were jars of spices. The strange purple fruit. And beneath them, a cloth bundle tied with a leather cord. Tavs felt her curiosity spike. Elias untied the cord. Then he spread the cloth open on the floor between them. Tavs looked down. Her heart skipped. 8 knives rested neatly inside the cloth. Each blade sat in its own pocket. Different shapes. Different sizes. One was wide and heavy. Another was thin and curved. One had a long narrow blade designed for precision cutting. The metal surfaces shone softly in the dim light. They were not energy weapons. They were not advanced alien technology. They were simple blades. Sharpened metal. But something about them felt dangerous. Tavs stared at them. Those are primitive tools, she said slowly. Elias picked up 2 of them. One large chef's knife. One thin boning knife. He tested their balance in his hands. They are reliable tools, he replied calmly. Tavs shook her head. No species still uses blades in modern combat, she said. Energy weapons replaced them centuries ago. Elias looked at her. His expression remained calm. Humans didn't stop using them. He rotated the blade slowly. The edge caught the dim station light. You built plasma weapons, he continued. You built particle cannons. You looked at knives and decided they were primitive. He shrugged slightly. We didn't. Tavs frowned. Why? Elias answered simply. Because knives still work. He pointed quietly toward one of the Gorvan soldiers. Look at his neck, he said. Tavs followed his gaze. There was a small gap between the chest armor and the jawline. Elias continued. Under the jaw. Inside the elbow. Behind the knee. Between rib plates. He spoke calmly. Like a teacher explaining anatomy. Every body has weak points, he said. Muscles. Tendons. Arteries. Tavs stared at him in disbelief. You sound like a hunter. Elias shook his head slightly. No, he said. A cook. He lifted the thin knife slightly. A cook spends years learning how bodies fit together. Where to cut. Where to separate muscle from bone. Where one clean stroke changes everything. Tavs felt a deep chill run through her. Because the way he spoke did not sound theoretical. It sounded practiced. She activated her neural implant quickly. Her report on humans appeared in her vision. Threat level, minimal. She stared at the line. Suddenly it looked very wrong. Elias quietly slid the 2 knives into his belt beneath his shirt. Then he looked at the other humans. Priya. Uncle. Chin. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. They had all seen the knives. Something passed between them. An understanding. Priya cracked her knuckles slowly. Anquo began tearing strips of cloth. Preparing bandages. Ro looked terrified. But he nodded anyway. Chin simply opened her eyes. They were sharp. Alert. Ready. Tavs watched them with growing confusion. You cannot fight them, she whispered urgently. There are 12 soldiers. They have plasma weapons. Elias nodded calmly. I know. Tavs leaned closer. The probability of survival is almost 0. Elias shrugged slightly. I didn't ask about probability. Tavs stared at him. Her analytical mind tried to calculate the situation. 1 human. Kitchen knives. Armored warriors. The math made no sense. You will die, she said. Elias looked toward the center of the room. Krothok still stood over the old Pelin. Waiting. Preparing to kill. The human cook's eyes hardened. Maybe, Elias said quietly. But that old man doesn't have to. Tavs felt something strange in her chest. Humans were supposed to be logical creatures. But this was something else. Something stubborn. Something dangerous. Elias leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. I have a plan. Priya looked up immediately. So do I, she said. Ro looked nervous. What kind of plan? Elias smiled faintly. The kind that only works once. Tav suddenly felt certain of one thing. Whatever happened next, the galaxy was about to learn something new about humans. The old Pelin trembled in the claws of the Gorvan soldiers. Krothox lifted one massive hand. The hall became silent. One dies every hour, the warlord announced. This one is first. The Pelin children screamed. Many hostages turned away. But Elias Vance did not look away. He slowly stood up. Tavs noticed the movement immediately. Her heart skipped. The human cook stepped away from the wall. Two knives rested hidden in his belt. His face was calm. Too calm. He leaned slightly toward the other humans. His voice dropped to a whisper. There are 12 guards, Elias said quietly. Krothox makes 13. Priya nodded. Elias continued. They are bigger. They are stronger. They have plasma weapons. He paused. In a fair fight, we lose. Rose swallowed nervously. So what do we do? Elias gave a small smile. We don't fight fair. He pointed his chin toward the side exits. Priya, he said softly. You are the strongest here. The door controls are on the wall beside the exits. When this starts, run to the panel. Hit the emergency override. Priya looked at the distance. About 10 meters. 2 guards nearby. She cracked her knuckles. Got it? Elias turned to Eonquo. When the doors open, you move the wounded. The medic nodded instantly. I already know who needs help. Elias looked at Chin. Can you help him? The old woman opened her eyes. They were calm. Yes, she said. Finally Elias looked at the teenager. Ro. The boy's hand shook. But he held the human's gaze. You are fast, Elias said. When the doors open, you lead the civilians. Get them out of here. Do not stop. Ro nodded slowly. What about you? Elias touched the knives in his belt. I keep the guards busy. Tav stared at him. This is impossible, she whispered. You are one person. They are armed soldiers. Elias looked at her. They will have to aim, he said calmly. And when people panic, they miss. Tavs almost laughed. Gorvan do not panic. Elias's eyes hardened. They will. Krothox raised his claw to strike the Pelin elder. That was the moment. Elias pulled the first knife from his belt. The blade flashed briefly in the dim light. Tavs felt a deep instinctive chill. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Elias began walking toward the guards. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply walked. Slow. Come. Measured steps. A knife in each hand. The nearest Gorvan guard noticed him. The soldier frowned. What are you doing, soft creature? He lifted his plasma pike. Go back. Elias kept walking. 3 more steps. Then he moved. Suddenly his body dropped low. The plasma pike swung above his head. Elias slipped inside the guard's reach. The thin knife flashed upward. Straight under the jaw. Into the soft gap beneath the armor. The blade sank deep. The guard made a choking sound. His weapon fell. His body collapsed. For 1 second the entire hall froze. No one understood what had just happened. Then chaos exploded.